Good evening. Welcome to the Politic podcast. Tonight, we have President Stuart Adams with us, and great to have you, President. It's, I've wanted to talk to you one-on-one like this before, and it's really great to have you out here.
I'm excited to be with you. It's actually a fun thing for me to be able to do a podcast.
Yeah, that'll be new. So, right at the first, I think everybody knows who you are, but they don't really know you. So why don't you give us a little bit of background?
Well, I'd love to do that. I grew up in Layton. I've lived in Layton my entire life. In fact, I'm a fifth generation Layton resident. That's a little unique. There's a lot of fifth generation Utahns, but 5 generations in one town. That's pretty.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing.
It is amazing. And I went to Layton Elementary, graduated from Layton Elementary. Then I went to Central Davis Junior High and graduated from Layton High. I'm a Lancer. So,
that's cool.
And then after high school, I went to University of Utah. So
what did you study when you were there?
I business finance.
Oh, okay.
Graduated. It only took me 3 years. Actually, it was very helpful for me because back then they didn't have concurrent enrollment, but they allowed you to take some tests. And I actually clept out of a few hours and was able to do it kind of quickly. I went on an LDS mission to Norway. And so that kind of interrupted.
Where did you go on your mission?
To Norway.
Oh, cool.
So really enjoyed that. We were the frozen chosen, John.
Yeah.
So a lot of the time I was above the Arctic Circle, but I had a great time there. And then came back and went to work. Actually, I always wanted to work with in the real estate business, my dad and brother, and so we started a little company together, and that's what I...
Oh, so you worked with your dad in that company.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So it was a great opportunity. He's a lot better person than I am, and if I could ever be anywhere close to what he was, I'd be a success. He's a phenomenal person.
Well, people that know you personally know that we can see that in you. That's really cool. So you started in real estate. Why in the world did you get into politics?
I had no desire at all to be involved in politics, not at all. And because I was in the real estate business, the city, Layton City, where I lived, they wanted somebody with real estate experience on their planning commission. So I agreed to serve on the planning commission, and was doing, I thought, a decent job at that, two nights a month, and doing what I thought was a civic duty. And my dad's fiercely patriotic, always wanted us to be involved in community service. And then the current mayor decided not to run for office, and the appropriations chair, which is Senator Stevenson,
oh yeah,
he decided to run for the mayor's job. And he was a city councilman at the time, and then so his city council seat came open. And I, again, had no desire to run, but I had everybody, I guess because I was on the planning commission, ask me to run for office. And I just told them no. I had no desire to run for political office. And then my dad, again, who's fiercely patriotic, told me that I ought to consider it and ought to do a civic duty. And then I also had a good friend, and I moved from the west side of 89 to the east side of 89. And I had a good friend who reminded me of an experience we had as we had a kind of a bad rainy night, and we turned circles on a rainy night on Highway 89 going 55 miles an hour. And he reminded me of that event. And my oldest daughter was turning 16. And he said, I think you'll make it back and forth across this highway because there weren't lights. There wasn't any way to get back and forth across the highway other than just gun the car and hope you made it across with 55 mile an hour traffic coming both ways. But he said, I don't know that your daughter and my son may make it across. And I went down and filed. 16 people filed for office, and I ended up on the city council.
With Jerry as the mayor.
Jerry is the mayor. I served 9 years on the city council. And because I was really involved and got involved in transportation issues, we got the lights on 89. But both my mom and dad drove back and forth to Salt Lake. And at the time, we were talking about trying to build a western highway, the Legacy Highway. And Mayor Anderson didn't want that. And because I was on the city council and I'd gotten so involved in transportation issues, I started taking that issue on and started championing the Legacy Highway.
Oh, wow.
And he was pushing back, and then a House seat came open. and I jumped out of my city council spot and ran for the state legislature. And so what I did was took on Mayor Anderson, held some money that Salt Lake City wanted for. They'd actually advanced money for the line to the airport, several $1 million, and he agreed not to litigate anymore. And then in 2006, I ran the legislation that permitted the Legacy Highway, and I decided to go home. And that's kind of how I ended up. And I just didn't run again for the House. Governor Huntsman decided that he wanted to put me on the Transportation Commission and asked me to serve there for a couple of years, which I did. And then Greg Bell, my senator, was chosen as lieutenant governor as Governor Huntsman went to China, and I ended back up in the Senate. But
Oh, wow.
I really didn't plan on doing this, John.
That doesn't seem like that long ago, but how long have you been in the Senate now?
2009 is when I came back, so it's been, a while,
Yeah.
11, 12 years, maybe
Yeah.
13 years now.
Yeah.
Time goes by.
Yeah, that's amazing. And how did you become the Senate president?
Well, again, you get involved and you just try to do things that are good. And so I don't think I really intended to do that either. But Wayne Niederhauser was the Senate president before I was, and he's just a phenomenal individual and was actually involved in leadership. And I think helping Wayne, we did a lot of great things together, and I could list the things, but just, again, trying to do things that are right.
So were you in leadership with him?
I was the whip. I served the entire time he served as president. I was the whip, and we did just a whole lot of stuff, but not as good as the last session. And the last session was probably the best session I've ever been involved in. It was historical. It was record breaking, and we did so much last.
Let's talk about some of that. We had a few. Rather than saving what was perceived as the more controversial issues till the end, we tackled them the first week.
We did, but before I get talking about
Okay.
that, I want to talk about the budget because
Okay.
We all know that Utah has the best economy in the nation. We're the best managed state. We have the lowest unemployment rate, which is great. And we looked at the last census over the last 10 years, and we were the fastest growing state in the nation. That's a great thing, but it causes problems. It causes problems at school. It causes problems with roads. It causes problems with housing. And last legislative session, we funded all of those services in a record-breaking way. Education, we normally do WPU, the weighted pupil unit, 3, 4, 5, sometimes a 6%. Last session, when you add it all up, a 13% increase in the WPU.
And that's on top of the largest increase in teacher salaries that we've had, which was separate from that.
And we've done all that over and again, during the pandemic, when other states were furloughing teachers, we were giving our teachers salary increases and bonuses. So this is again, on top of all that. And if that wasn't enough, okay, and if you add the one-time in, John, it's 18%, 18.5% WPU. But then, not only in education, we know, again, having very well been involved in transportation issues, that infrastructure is important. We want to maintain our quality of life. And it's important we're able to get around and we don't become like LA or some other of these big cities. So we actually appropriated $2 billion. I can't remember when we did that last. $2 billion for infrastructure. When I first came in the legislature in 2002, we were bonding for our buildings. And we thought we did a really good job when we stopped bonding and started paying cash for our buildings. Now, instead of paying cash, we have ongoing money appropriated for buildings and roads. And that means if the economy ever turns down, which it might, we can actually quit building those buildings or quit building the roads. That ongoing money helps us walk through those bad times. No other state in the nation has managed their affairs so well. And again, on top of that, on top of all the ongoing money, we appropriated $2 billion for infrastructure. A record-breaking session for education and infrastructure.
Yeah, it's amazing when you think about it, right?
Yeah.
So, what about some of the policy things? What do you see as the
You started off saying that we actually started the session with a bang, and we did. Uh, we knew. I mean, other nations have actually taken on puberty blockers and surgeries. And in fact, Sweden and Finland and England were some of the first countries to actually experiment with puberty blockers for trans individuals. Now, they're some of the first countries to actually block it. And the data has shown that those, it's not, especially for the kids under 18, that they need to be able to be mature to make these life-altering decisions later in life when they've thought things through. And so the first thing we did was ban that. Senator Kennedy did a great job. And,
yeah, he was awesome in,
yeah, he was.
in the way he handled that.
And then the other thing we did is, again, we talked about the funding for education and how important teachers are. We had the best teachers anywhere in the world in Utah. But we also, during the pandemic, parents got really involved, really involved in the kids' education. And as they did that, they started to want some options. And they wanted options to be able to decide where their kids went to school. And we heard that loud and clear. So we passed school choice. And I think that was a great thing for the legislature to do, very hard to do. We were the only state, I think, in the nation to pass it by supermajority in both houses by 2/3. And we did that in the first week or two of the session.
Which means the governor has no choice but to sign the bill, right?
Because if he doesn't, we'll be able to override him during the session.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing, actually, wasn't it?
It was a great 2 weeks, but we didn't stop there. It was a record number of bills for the session, and I don't know if that's good or bad, but I'm kind of proud of the fact that we had a record number of bills, but we did it in the record time. We closed the session about 9:30 on Friday night, which is
unusual. Huh?
Again, a record. It's never been closed that early. So, but we dealt with issues, John, like ESG. Senator Wilson did a great job with that. We're seeing it's just amazing that the type of influences we're seeing, the social influences. Our founding fathers, they put together a pretty good process, and we get to see it. You and I get to see it up front and personal, where the legislature sets policy, and the executive branch carries it out. Never did our founding fathers determine that people not elected by the people should be setting social policy. And that's what ESG has been doing.
Right.
And we pushed back in a big way in Utah. Senator Wilson led the charge, and I think he did a great job.
Oh, fabulous. Yeah, and I thought the bills were very reasonable, but yet I think they're going to be very effective.
Yeah, they are. Social media, a statistic that I've been, I didn't know what a hockey graph was. I hadn't heard of it. And a hockey graph is, you look at a hockey stick, and the stick, where you hit the puck is kind of flat.
Yeah.
And then the handle goes up sharp.
Yeah, like this.
And I learned what a hockey graph was this session. And what we learned was that teenage girls, their visits to the emergency room in the hospital up until about 2010 was kind of flat, like the base of that hockey graph. And at 2010, their visits to emergency rooms for all types of emotional and other issues went up like a hockey stick. And it's correlated to social media. And we pushed back in a big way on social media. Senator McKell and others in the House and that is something that I think we need to keep pushing on. If we love our kids, we want a great education for them, we've got to deal with what's happening on social media. Lots happened.
Yeah. Hey, we're going to take a break, and we'll be right back.
Well, thanks.
Welcome back to Politic Podcast. Of course, we're talking with Stuart Adams, President of the Utah State Senate. And it's nice to have you. Yeah. And so, let's go back to some of these historic things that were happening. Historic session, right?
Historic, record-breaking. Record-breaking for education. We funded education at record levels. We funded infrastructure at record levels. But we also did something. I predicted at the very beginning of the session that 2023 would be the year of the tax cut. Again, again, and again.
Yeah.
We cut taxes for the last 3 years.
Now, a couple you didn't mention was the tax on Social Security for seniors.
Yeah, it was amazing. We cut taxes $850 million. Again, a record tax cut. So we actually cut, if you live in Utah and you make less than $75,000 a year, you don't pay any Social Security income tax. And we cut the income tax. It used to be up around 5%. We've got it down to 4.85, and we dropped it from 4.85 now to 4.65, the income tax. And then another thing that most people haven't heard of, if you live in Utah and you have children that are 3 years old and younger, you get double the dependent exemption. We believe in families. We love families. We're seeing the birth rate slow up, but this will help those young families be able to afford the cost of raising children. And another tax cut, again, part of the $850 million that we did, was a property tax cut. We stopped.
Yeah, and that's one that is not mentioned in the articles that I read.
It's not. So I actually wrote down the change in the basic levy. It's kind of interesting. We dropped the basic levy from 0.00161 to 0.00356. That's $146 million cut in property taxes. So we did a lot of things that a lot of people don't know about. Again, a very historic session.
Yeah. A lot of people don't realize that our portion of the property tax statewide for the state coffers is very small anyway, right? But
most all the property tax, in fact, the state gets very little. Most of the property tax stays local. We had other record-breaking things we did. We had record-breaking funding for housing. $200 million we spent.
that was actually a bill you introduced.
Well, a part of it.
The one of them was.
Yeah, so $200 million we appropriated for housing, but a lot of the focus over the last few years has been on affordable housing, and that focus has been on multifamily. We've tried to get cities to do more multifamily zoning. We've tried to push the cost of rent down, but I really am concerned. In fact, I got anxiety over the fact that I'm afraid we may lose our middle class if everybody just rents and we have tenants and landlords. Most people's net worth are in their house. And in America, we believe, and I believe passionately in home ownership. And I think we not only believe in America, we believe in Utah. So back in the 80s and 90s, and again, I told you I was in the real estate business, so I experienced some of this. Utah Housing had a first home buyer program. And I ran a bill that helped reinstitute that. And again, it's not a gift, it's a loan, but it allows you to take $20,000. We appropriated $50 million of the 200, so a portion of it. And it allows you to take $20,000 and use it for either to buy the rate down, and we're seeing rates go up right now, or for closing costs or a down payment. And my hope is that will change the narrative from affordable housing being just apartments and landlord and tenants into home ownership.
So as that money gets paid back, it's used again, right?
It is. It'll revolve back around and be used again. And we focused on new construction because I talked to a lot of cities and they said, we're zoning small lots, but builders and developers aren't building first home product on it. And we need to motivate both cities and developers to focus on the first home market. And my hope is, we're seeing rates go up a little bit right now, my hope is that they'll all pivot and start building product that kids can get into. There's something that happens, not only is your net worth in your home, and when you're able to use that net worth when you get older and need to retire, but there's something that happens with home ownership. There's a pride, there's a self-esteem, there's just some degree of security that happens, and we need to focus more on that in Utah. And I was very proud to be able to push that. And I think it'll make a big difference.
Yeah. Well, that the way things are now with the bigger lot, there's so much money tied up into lot, the house isn't affordable.
And I think if anybody can, Utah can help fix that problem. And the other thing we did, we record spending again, John, this last session, $500 million on water. We spent $500 million last year, $500 million we appropriated again this year, $1 billion. And we know that we're having a record water year, and we're all really, really grateful for the prayers and for the water we've had, for the snow. It keeps snowing, which is great. But we know
we need about another partial month of it, though, don't we?
Well, we need a partial month. We need 2 or 3 years of it. But Utah is the second driest state in the nation. So we have to keep working on water. And we're going to fix our water problems. There's no question in my mind. We actually found when we were in Israel with the governor, the Israeli government they're doing things, sometimes people do things better than we do. And I think Utah does things really well. But we have a drip system that we're able to use, and you drip water at the base of the plant, but part of that water evaporates, even though it's better than sprinkling system. Well, in Israel, they use a subsurface drip system, and there's no evaporation. And they actually then add fertilizer to it. They're getting twice the yield on their crops with half the water. If we could use half the water in Utah, we would fix all of our water problems if we could for the agricultural industry. And we appropriated $200 million. It's kind of got a phrase, ag optimization, but it is an effort to try to develop. And when you develop water, you're not going to build new reservoirs. You're going to do it through conservation. So this is a way to find new water through conserving.
That's amazing.
It is.
It's really cool to be on the inside and watch how these things develop. And what's really neat is there's a lot of thought into these things before the session actually starts.
So record session, record education spending, record spending on infrastructure, record spending on housing, record spending on water, and a record tax cut.
Yeah.
A lot of states can spend money, and we know some of our neighbors spend a lot of money, but very few states are able to fund the services that our citizens need and manage the growth that we're having and do tax cuts. So I'm really proud of that what we did in the session. And
now, one thing that's been a little bit confusing to people, they don't understand what is it with this the sales tax on food and the fact that we want to change the Constitution. People have some problems with that. But why don't you explain exactly what the thoughts are behind that?
Thank you for asking. And in Utah, we have a very unique situation where constitutionally, income tax is generally allocated or required to be spent on education. And again, we don't get property tax. I talked about that before. So all we have is sales tax to run the rest of the government. And when your income tax is dedicated to education, you kind of have one hand tied behind your back because you don't have the flexibility when you have other services you need to fund. All you can fund those with is income tax. Sales tax. But when you start taking the sales tax off of food and you can't use income tax, it becomes almost impossible to fund the other government services. So in order to take the sales tax off of food, we have to deal with that constitutional amendment. And one of the things I don't think most people think about is that we have economists all over the nation that have looked at what is good tax policy. And most all of them agree unanimously that a tax on productivity is not good tax policy. And let me give you an example. A tax on productivity is income tax. And if I were to tax 100% of your income, would you go to work?
Yeah, see that.
You'd think about it. Maybe some people would, some people wouldn't. But when you tax people's productivity, you get less of it. So most states, Arizona just dropped their income tax to just 2.5%. Mississippi ran a bill that's doing away with theirs. There's 8 or 9 other states that have no income tax. A tax on productivity is the biggest drain or the biggest anchor on economic development. And those states that don't have income tax, They do better economically than any other states in the nation. So one of the things we're looking at is actually trying to reduce the income tax, which again we did this year, and that tax on productivity.
Yeah, so that's actually, I think, something people don't realize. The other thing I've been thinking about is that income taxes follow business cycles, right? And so when you're talking about long-term funding of like teacher salaries, for instance, you know when you've got this ebb and flow of the income tax, sometimes it's good to move some of that over into a tax that doesn't do that as much, that's a little more stable.
So income tax is the most volatile of all of our taxes. Property tax is the most stable, but probably the most hated. Okay, and I think we understand why. So the tax that probably needs to be looked at is a tax on consumption, that sales tax. And so it is really difficult to start removing that off of food, but I think we can do that. I think we all support that. But we have to deal with this constitutional amendment before we think about taking the sales tax off of food.
Yeah, see,
That's why we put them on at the ballot.
yeah, it's a good idea actually, right? To stabilize some of that over time. It's been so nice talking to you, President Adams. Thanks for coming in. And any parting thoughts to people that are watching?
Well, it's just great to spend some time with you. And I just maybe say that it's really great to live in America, in the best country by far of any country in the world. But Utah, it's really great to live in the best state, in the best country in the world. It's so fortunate. We're seeing that happen. And I would like to say that Utah is not great. We talked about a lot of regulatory policies and the great things we've done as a legislature, but Utah is not great because of our regulatory policies or what we do at the legislature. It's great because of the people that live in Utah. And it's really fortunate to be here. And I'm honored to be able to serve in Utah. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. And we'll see you guys next week.